Paranormal Punches is part of the Podbelly Network. Go to podbelly.com for more great podcasts.
Hey, y'all. This is Frank the Bigfoot, and you're listening to the Paranormal Punchers.
Hey, friends. Welcome to a bonus episode of Paranormal Punchers. I'm Mark.
I'm Alicia.
And we are here with John Olsen, author of so many paranormal books. And John, welcome to the show.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. It's great. It's always fun to come talk to you guys and stories. And
yeah, you have a new book. It's called Stranger Paranormal. Is this like the fourth or fifth book you've written?
It's my sixth
Your
book,
sixth?
believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah, it's my sixth book. And I was really excited because as of Friday, it actually reached on Amazon #1 on the UFO and paranormal. We got a lot of lists, but it's #1 on the new releases for UFO paranormal on Amazon, which just shocked me. It was awesome. But yeah, so it's great. I mean, I've got another book out. I'm still gathering stories, and it's just been a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's awesome news, man. Congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Now, like I said, this one's called Stranger Paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
And just like the other books, these are not made up. You interview people about their paranormal experiences. So these are all true stories in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So, a long time ago when I first started, when I was collecting stories, I had to hunt people down and word of mouth. But now that, my books have come out with my website, it's easier for people to contact me. It's been a lot easier to find stories, and the stories are a lot farther away. But some of the rules that I have is it's got to be from the person that it happened to in order to go in the book. I collect a lot of other stories too, but in order to share them, I've got to be able to talk to the person that it happened to. And because I think it's important that it's kind of that way, because there's a lot of folklore and different stuff out there where it happened to somebody's uncles, brothers, cousins, nieces, nephew, whatever. And this is all first-hand accounts.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, we'll jump into some of these stories, but right in the beginning, you talk about a little paranormal experience you had in the intro of the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've had, what got me started in the beginning was, my experiences growing up, and, some of the experiences that I've had in the home that I grew up in. The last 2 years, just recently, my wife and I, moved just outside one town over from my parents. But for 2 years, we lived really near my parents and this old house again, and helping them because they were having some problems, some health problems. So for 2 years, we were there every day off and on. And in that time, we had experiences of our own going on. One in particular that I put in the book, I was there cleaning my parents' house, the basement. And whenever you clean, the ghost really doesn't like that when you clean or move or change things. And I was cleaning a lot of things in the basement. And I'm down there and I'm just kind of observing, looking at the basement, trying to decide what's next. And all of a sudden I get a bonk right on the top of my head, just smack. And I look up, and above you there in the rafters is where we keep all our fishing poles and stuff to keep them out of the way. And one of the poles had been bent down the base of it and bashed me on the head, and it was still wiggling up there. It was wiggling back into place. And I said, I kind of brushed it off because I know that, ghost doesn't like things getting moved around and things getting changed. And so I go back to moving more things out. I was throwing away garbage or really old things. And I was standing there again, trying to figure out what was going on. And I get just a shove in the back kind of a thing, kind of a, you didn't listen the first time. I'm here. I don't like this changed. And I stood there and I said, this has got to be cleaned up. This is a mess. I said, I'm going to go have lunch. You come to terms with what's happening because I've got to clean this place up. And I went out and had some lunch and come back and didn't have any more problems that day. But it's kind of an interesting thing too, to have that happen to you and kind of a wake up call, because, they live there too. And there's certain things they don't like. And
Right.
so, yeah, it's kind of interesting to be there and have that kind of experience.
I don't know. That's pretty aggressive to smack you with a baseball bat.
Yeah,
Oh,
smack you on the head. And,
I mean, I'd be asking them to pay rent or get out with that kind of attitude.
right. And it's funny that, you'll go a long time without anything that happens there at all, months. And then all of a sudden the activity will just kick up, and my dad or my brother will call me and let me know, I got to tell you what happened. I got to tell you, what happened to me the other day. And another thing that happened, and I believe this is in the book, if I remember correctly, my wife turned to go up the steep stairs. And these are the stairs that you always hear the heavy foot boots up and down, that we call the stair monster. And she looked up, and at the top of the stairs, there's a door. And there was just a man's hand around the corner like this. And it had a white shirt, button-up shirt, and it just kind of slid around the corner. And she went upstairs, and there was nobody there. Nobody was upstairs. Nobody was around. But that was kind of letting the ghost let her know that I am still around and still up here. So,
my goodness.
Wow. Now, why don't we jump into some of these stories that you've collected in this book? Just a couple. We, want people to get a taste of what they can expect when they get this book. But if you don't mind, I know the one, it's the very first story, but you said
it terrified me.
You. The one about doppelganger.
Yeah.
The doppelganger. Yeah. And that was a great one by Kent. And he had contacted me after hearing me on a podcast, and he had this great story. He lived in Pensacola, Florida at the time. He was an engineer, young engineer, just had graduated. He was, I believe, originally from Alabama, if I remember correctly. And he worked at this shop where it was engineering and a machine shop in the basement, and the offices were above. And he had heard stories from, the cleaning crew that the place was haunted. And he just kind of, he's like, yeah, sure, whatever. And one night on a Friday, one of the parts that they needed delivered that weekend had gotten screwed up in the machine shop. And when they went through it all, it was actually something he had done in the engineering. And so the plan was he was going to stay there that night, fix that, so they could run the parts on Saturday and ship them off on Sunday, kind of express, so that they could still get there to the client. So everybody slowly leaves. He's in his office working. And after a while, he starts hearing footsteps in the office behind him, in the open part of the office. And on one side, he had his office that he could close. And on the other side was the boss / owner's office. And then in between was a lot of cubicle, kind of an open space. And he starts hearing footsteps, and he calls out. He's like, hey, who's there? Who's up here with me? And there's nothing. And he goes back to work. And then after a little while longer, he hears footsteps, somebody walking right up to his office door, and he turns, and there's nobody there. And then he hears the footsteps run and then run downstairs. And so he gets up and follows it and goes down to the machine shop, turns on all the lights, looks all the way around, because it's very obvious footsteps, and can't find anything, can't find anybody. Everything's locked up. So he just goes back to his office and starts working again. And this is when it gets really creepy. He hears somebody calling his name out, in the open floor kind of area. And he's calling, Kent, come help me, and almost in a sing-song kind of weird voice. And he goes out in the office, and he's looking around, and the stairs that go down to the machine shop, there's somebody standing there about 2 steps, if I remember correctly, 2 steps down or so, in the stairwell, and looking at him. And he looks, and he just, like, his blood runs straight cold, because he's looking at himself. It's himself standing there, except for, he said, it looked like the other him was really tired with dark black bags under his eyes and slick back, dark hair. But other than that, it was him, and the voice he recognized was him. And this creature calls out to him, and motions to him, come on, Kenty boy is what he calls him. Come on, Kenty boy, come with me. And he flips out, which you would in that situation. Runs in his office, slams the door, barricades it, climbs under his desk, and calls his boss. He's like, somebody's in here. Somebody's, broken in, whatever. And his boss hangs up with him and says he's on his way down, and he can hear footsteps and this thing calling him every once in a while and laughing every once in a while. And finally, he's in tears, sweat, everything. Finally, there's a big bang on his office door, and he looks around and it's his boss. And he goes and lets his boss in, and his boss calms him down, and then they look through the entire building and nobody's in there, nothing. And, he tries to explain to his boss what he saw without sounding too crazy. His boss tells him, you're under way too much stress. This has gotten to you, go home. We'll get this fixed. We'll get it taken care of. And he does. He goes home, eventually comes back, and he works there for a few more years, but he just ends up having to change jobs because just the whole feel of being there gave him basically like PTSD, and shock. And he says that, he works well away from there now and everything, but he's still, if he's the last one out of the office, he goes into shock. Like he cannot be the last one out of the office, even to today. And it's been quite a while that this happened to him. He's like, no, I have to leave before everybody else does, or I just have panic attack.
Right.
So,
yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Now, did something like that happen to him ever again? Did he say?
No, he never had really, if I remember correctly, he's never really had anything like that happen to him before, but it had, like I said, it's really kind of affected his life afterwards.
Yeah.
Right.
Which, it would, something like that. But yeah. And he doesn't really like to share the story with a lot of people because that being his only paranormal experience and everything, he just worries about what people will think of him and everything. But yeah, it's just really interesting. And, it's got me really studying and looking into, doppelgangers and stories like that, where whatever it is mimicking or taking the shape of either you or somebody, or,
right.
Something like that. And it's really kind of a creepy, phenomena that happens to people.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because your other book, or your other books had doppelganger stories. So this phenomenon has happened to people around the country.
Yeah. So I can't remember how many books it was ago. I shared a story about a kid who was camping with his family and playing hide and seek with his cousins in the mountains, and something was trying to lure him away that looked like his cousin and trying to lure him up the canyon. And when he finally came back, got scared enough and came back, he only to find out his cousin's been in camp the whole time. And so that was one of the first stories that I got of kind of a doppelganger thing going on. And so after I wrote that, I was really surprised at how many people contacted me afterwards saying, I had a very similar experience where something was mimicking either an older brother, an older cousin, somebody that they as kids looked up to and would follow somewhere necessarily, trying to lure them either into the woods or into abandoned buildings or, just away from other people. And so what I thought might have been a one-off kind of thing ended up being like huge, with people having experiences everywhere about this. And so it's kind of, it's cool and creepy and scary all at the same time,
Yeah, very much so. You have a little list there, dear. Is there a story you're really curious about?
Well, I'm always curious about shadow men, and I did see one about that. I wasn't sure if you could give us some more details.
Do you remember the name of that one? That was Shadow Men is the ones that.
There was one I read, the Coolidge Shadow Man.
Yeah.
The COVID. Say that again.
Coolidge. Shadow Man. I hope there's not a COVID Shadow Man.
Oh yeah, right. I was like, oh man. Yeah. So that one was pretty cool too. I'm trying to remember exactly how that one started. The Shadow Man is really cool because it's one of those things that it seems to be all over the place. Like a lot of people have those experiences with, shadow men and how, they can vary in size and everything that's going on, from in the mountains. There's like a lot of bigger ones that happen. And in the city, they seem to be more even smaller than people or, kind of a normal size. But this one was cool. I interviewed Ian, and he talked about how he had moved from Southern California to Montana. And I believe this was in the 70s. So, he was like, first of all, that's a huge culture shock to go from Southern California in the 70s to Montana in the 70s because, it's just a completely different vibe. But after a while, he got to, meet some friends and get to know people. And, he was never an outdoorsman, but his friends got him to do outdoor stuff. And they were, him and a couple of his buddies decided to go camping up near this old mining town called Coolidge that's up there. And they were camped out and away from it. But when it got dark and after they had some dinner and everything, they kind of drove up to the parking area and then walked in at night because they thought, being teenagers, they thought, oh, this is going to be cool to go do at night. And as they're going, the first thing they kind of notice is they hear some men talking down the street, and they're like, oh, we're not supposed to be here at night, I'm sure. So they dodge into a building to kind of hide, and they can hear the men talking, and they're walking up the boards of the street, which were all boards back then. And as they walk by, they realize there's nobody out there. All they can do is hear the men talking, but they don't see them. And they go up and they head up the road and towards the mine area. And they're really kind of freaked out, obviously, because, they heard people, but they didn't see anybody out there. And about this time, they notice near the same area where the voices had come from, there was this big, shadow creature looking at them from, around the area where they came from, these men that were talking. And this shadow creature seems to know really where they are and what's going on. And they end up just, it coming closer and drive, running them out of town, basically getting away from them. And they just end up getting scared out of this town by this big, kind of shadow monster, shadow creature.
Wow.
And they're just talking about, I remember interviewing him talking about just, how scary it was. This thing was darker than any of the shadows out there, how defined it was. And, the way the voices that came up the street and they listened to seemed more like almost like a residual. To me, it sounded like a residual ghost thing. But this shadow creature that basically chased them back to the truck was much more malevolent, knew they were there and didn't want them there. And, literally chased them out of this town. And, he felt like they barely made it to the truck and out of there with their lives, is how he felt about the whole story.
Right. Like at the end there, the one kid fell down and he said the shadow was reaching for him.
Oh, God.
Yeah,
like, wow.
Yeah. Yep. I blocked that part out, but now that where
I won't forget that part.
And it was reaching out for him, just that fear. And, with a lot of people that I interview and talk about these shadow creatures or shadow men or whatever you want to call them, it's just, it almost seems like there's an entity there that really doesn't want you there. and will do whatever it needs to get you and push you out of the area. And it's super scary for sure.
Yeah. And with the stories, I love a lot of the ghost stories, but I love the fact that your book crosses all paranormal. Not only we have doppelganger, we just had a shadow man, but this book has cryptids galore too.
Yep.
And who doesn't love a good cryptid story? And, I've been seeing a lot of stories about dogmen a lot lately, just popping up. So I don't know if it's more people are just starting to see them or what's going on, but you have a pretty good one here in the book.
Yeah. So, and this was James that I interviewed that contacted me. And one thing that he mentioned in the interview was that, this had happened a long time ago for him when he was a teenager. But for a long time, he'd never heard of dogmen or, in his mind, what he had seen was a werewolf, which didn't make a lot of sense. And, but with all of these stories coming out, that's when he kind of felt more comfortable, sharing his story, because he didn't feel like it was alone. Like for a long time, he was like, yeah, I saw a werewolf and people are going to think I'm crazy that I saw a werewolf. That's a fake cryptid. That's something out of a movie. But so this one comes out of Canada. They live in Prince Albert in British Columbia. And him and his dad were really big into fishing. They love to go fishing a lot. And they went, drove, it's about 2 or 3 hours away. It's called Wayaquin Lake. There, not too far from Prince Albert. And him and his dad would go up there quite a bit. It was summertime, and they took their boat, and they would spend, a couple days fishing and just having a great time. And they went up there and they spent the day trolling on the lake, and then came back and had dinner. And then they were going to go out and stay closer to shore and just pitch for some pike and some other stuff like that. And at that time of year, in the summer, the peak of summer, it doesn't even get dark until like 11:30 at night. So you can fish a long time. And so they were out there, they pulled into this cove and started pitching and fishing right there. And he noticed, first of all, the first thing he noticed is that it went dead quiet. He's like, you couldn't hear the bugs, you couldn't hear the frogs, you couldn't hear, any of the normal sounds. And it's amazing how many stories like that when people are in the wilderness and that happens, and that something spooky is about to happen. The animals somehow know before you do. But he looked at his dad and he's like, why is it so quiet? And his dad's like, well, I don't know. And so they kept going. And his dad noticed this creature first. He saw his dad, and his dad's face, his eyes pop open, and he's just kind of staring. And he's like, what's the matter? And his dad points towards the shore, and it's not that far away. And this creature has stepped out of the trees and is standing there. And he had such a great, sight of this creature. It was getting dark, but it wasn't dark. And it had the head of a black German Shepherd with the pointy ears. Mm-hmm. It had the upper body of a man, but covered in fur. He talked about being able to see the muscles underneath the fur, and it was covered by brush from, the waist down, but it was obviously bipedal. It wasn't a wolf standing on its back legs. And it had deep set red eyes that he could see. And him and his dad just staring at this thing. And it kind of knew they were there, but as soon as they recognize that they're seeing each other, this thing crouches down into kind of a defensive position. And when it brings up his hands, he can see, it's huge human shaped hands with just shiny, white claws on it. And this thing starts snarling like a dog and growling, and he can feel the reverberation of this growl at them. He talked about seeing, the fur move and hackles coming up. he's just staring at this thing as their boat's floating by. And, he's afraid this thing might jump out at him. What's it going to do? Both him and his dad are just frozen in fear. And after a few minutes of watching this thing, it turns and takes off into the forest. And he says the one thing that he remembers is that when it turned to leave, he could see the tail. It had a tail like a dog as well that was up. And it takes off, into the forest. And slowly the sounds start coming back. And he's talking to his dad, and they start to leave. And just the emotions of all of this, he's 15 years old at the time. He just breaks down sobbing, just sobbing. And he said that was weird because he wasn't really an emotional kid, but the overwhelming everything that just happened, being able to see something that you never thought was even real. And him and his dad go back to camp. They sit up all night with a big fire because they're like they want to stay, but they don't want to leave. But they're scared, because they're a ways from where this happened with their camp. But obviously, you never know. But they stayed up all night, and then they were tired and slept really hard, and woke up and was finally decided, by noon, in the afternoon when they woke up, they're like, we don't want to be here. We just don't want to be here. So they left and went home. But talking with his dad over time and everything, they both saw the exact same thing. They had the same details with the large mouth, teeth, snarl, red eyes, everything. And just super creepy. I love when I can interview somebody like that has a lot of detail. They see a lot of detail.
Right.
It's not something quick. It was a minute, maybe two, that he got to see this creature. And I just love that story. It's a good one.
Yeah, that would be terrifying. In fact, I would have just packed up and went home right away.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think I would have too. I wouldn't have that, no matter how big the fire was.
Right.
But,
yeah, I was like, I wonder if it was wearing pants, but I guess they couldn't tell.
Yeah.
Because like in every, Scooby-Doo werewolf always has the ripped up jeans on.
Right.
So that's how you know it's a werewolf.
Yep, exactly. So, and I thought that was really cool the way he talked about the detail of it looking very much like a black German Shepherd with the long snout, pointed ears, and so that was a really good one. I was really excited to get that story.
Yeah, that'd be scary. It probably looking like a shepherd. Yeah, that definitely would be scary. But I think it would be more unnerving if it looked like a golden retriever, because that would just be like so crazy.
Too inviting, right?
Yeah.
I've got a great big black lab, and he's scary because he's so big, but like he'd just slobber you to death. So I wouldn't be too terribly scary that way. But
now we don't want to have you tell us all the stories, so people buy the book and read it and enjoy it for themselves. But why don't you see? Can we leave us with one more tasty story?
You bet. So another one too, and when we were messaging back and forth, you talked about it a little bit. It's called bait, which and you'll see why I kind of named it that as we go into the story. There was a gentleman named Mike who contacted me at the time. He lived in Northern California as a teenager, and the summer before he was a junior, he worked at a little convenience store, and he just talked about, that, around that time he would work, and after he closed down, or, when he got off work, him and his buddies would just go and hang out. And they had a house that was just outside of town that was abandoned. And like all of the high school kids just hung out there because you could make a fire. It was near the forest. So nobody really bothered you. And so him and two of his buddies, Brian and Andy, they pick him up after work one night. They go out to the local place, go in the backyard, start a fire, and they're just kind of hanging out and talking. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, one of them stops and says, can you hear that? And so they're quiet and they listen, and they can hear a woman crying, and it's coming from the forest behind. There's like a broken down wood fence, and then the forest was right there. and it's coming from the forest. And they're like, well, I wonder if somebody's in trouble. I wonder if something's going on. And so the three of them, they had one flashlight between the three of them, and they climbed through the fence and start going out into the woods. And as you know, they can hear the woman crying, but it seems to, you know, no matter how far in they go, it seems to be matching them and going further back into the woods. And after a while, they're like, I don't want to do this. You know, something's wrong with what's going on. And so they turn to leave. And as they're leaving, the crying follows them back. This woman's crying is following them back. And one of them, I think it was Andy, turned and said, hey, you know, yelled out in the forest, are you okay? Do you need some help? And all of a sudden he freezes. And Mike has the flashlight and he shines it towards where Andy's looking. And here's this creature that's peeking at them from behind a tree. And it doesn't have a lot of facial features. It's pure white, you know, dark eyes, you know, no ears that they can see, and just like a slit. He said it was just like a slit that at first he really couldn't see really well of a mouth. And as, you know, they're looking at this thing, a great big bony hand comes around the tree, and the slit almost, you know, turns into an up smile. And obviously, you know, that's you're at that point you're done. You got to get out of there. And so Mike turns to run and runs right into Brian. They go down into a pile. Andy vaults over both of them. He's the bigger, stronger kid out of all of them, and just takes off. He leaves them, and they scramble up and just head out of there. And finally they catch up to Andy on the road. And what was, you know, it's funny that I think Brian at the time was really mad and took a swing at Andy that he left him there. There's an old adage that you don't have to outrun a bear, you just have to outrun the person that's with you. And
Right.
that really is echoed in this story. But, you know, later they talked about what they saw, obviously, and they saw the same thing. Really tall, gangly, white creature. Nothing but that slit of the smile. It turned into a red smile. And, you know, talking with him, with Mike, and the other experiences I've had, you know, I don't know if it's the same thing as a mimic. It was obviously mimicking a woman cries, but there's a lot of history and lore about creatures that live in the forest that try and lure people away in some way or another. And I just feel like, you know, it was using this woman's cry as bait to lure them out there, you know, whatever it is they were going to do, whatever creature this was or entity or whatever, you know, it was just, you know, obviously extremely frightful for them. But, and again, it was kind of a weird one that I hadn't necessarily heard that kind of a figure before. You know, similar to that, but not exactly with the wide mouth and stuff like that. But it was, again, a really creepy story for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that would be terrifying. But also to have your friends leave you behind.
Right.
That sucks.
Right. You find out in the foxhole who's your real friend real quick, right?
Man, that would be terrifying. It's almost like a blank slate, the creature. I wonder if it could lure people out and kind of then adopt their identity, change their look, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, I think this goes into as well, there's this thing going on too, where people are seeing creatures that are, you know, you would think are you use the word made up because somebody has written it in Reddit or, you know, a story, and it catches fire with kids, like say Slender Man or something like that. And now people are seeing that. And so I've had people come to me and say, well, see, you know, Slender Man isn't real, and yet people are seeing it. So that kind of means that it's all made up. And I explain it like this. I believe in my own personal belief, after interviewing all these people, there are entities, especially in the forest, that will take shape of the things that scare you, or take the shape of the things that you're either most afraid of, or that you're whatever it is. And that might be what it is these entities are taking shapes of creatures that these kids know about and have read about, and using that to either scare them or lure them or whatever you want to call it. So in my mind, it's not saying everything is fake. I believe it's something deeper that's going on. So
you just made that story even scarier. So
right.
Wow. All right. So we won't spoil any more of the book. But again, you said this was your 6th book?
Yeah, 6th book. So, and they're all found on Amazon under you can get them on Kindle or softback under the Stranger Bridgerland book series. You can also go onto my website, strangerbridgerland.com, and they'll direct you also, where to buy the books on Amazon. And so you can also go on there, anybody, and see where I'm going to be speaking. I'm going to do some speaking engagements here, with it being October and the creepy time of year coming up, going out and talking to people. And so, you can find all that information there.
Well, thank you, John. The book's called Stranger Paranormal. We'll put links in the show notes for everybody.
Yes.
As always, it's a pleasure to have you on the show telling us these scary stories. It's so much fun, John.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming you got more books in the works, so we'll be doing this again.
Yeah. Definitely. I'm going to keep going as long as people keep bringing their stories to me.
Fantastic. And again, congratulations with the success of the book.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us, John. And we will talk to you very, very soon.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.